All right. Hi, everybody. This is Kubernetes SIG architecture meeting for May 1st, 2025. And we have pretty full agenda today. So let's get started. I will display that. I think, David, you're up.
Thanks. So this is a topic we've talked about a couple different times. Came up once on a mailing list, then once with a Google Doc, and now there is a KEP been open for a couple weeks about increasing our beta requirements, making betas more reliable because they're on by default. At this point, we've talked about it several times. We've gone over the verbs before. What I'm hoping for is a review. And if we decide we're going to go forward, deciding which release we're going to go forward in. I think if we were to do it relatively short time frame from now, it could be reasonable for 134. But the longer we delay, the less tenable that is.
So I think my only concern, so I would say in general, I'm aligned with this. I think it makes sense. It's on by default. It should be safe. All you're really doing is documenting the things that really people probably should have been doing all along. Um, the the concern is it is raising the bar, and it's raising the bar in a way that if we do it for 134, um, I guess we're early enough. What you're saying is we're early enough in the 134 cycle. It hasn't even started yet, theoretically, that if somebody wants to go to beta in 134, it just means they're going to have to put the effort in to make sure they cross all these T's and dot all these I's, which they should have been doing anyway. Um, so in that sense, it's not like we're saying, oh, you should have done something last cycle in order to do this. This is all for this cycle, and it's all stuff you would have to do.
I
That
think if we were to approve in the next week or so, it is reasonable to do that. I think that if we push it beyond 2 weeks, it is untenable to do that. And in the interim, I would say it's fuzzy.
Yeah. Okay. Looks like Antonio has a couple questions here. I don't know if you've had a
I
chance to.
didn't. I'm happy to respond to those. They didn't look fundamental. There
Right.
was a question about whether there was going to be a GA locked and GA unlocked. I think that's no. When we go GA, it's locked. That's what GA
Definitionally.
means.
Yeah.
Um, and there was some.
So there's this one in the cracks here, right, where we don't go on default by default if the APIs are beta. So, and presumably we can't advance the APIs to GA and leave the feature gate in beta. So, or maybe we can, but I've never seems kind of odd. Um, so how do we get the confidence with, like, the whole point of beta being on by default but not yet locked on by default is confidence. But I don't know how we get the confidence if the APIs aren't available. So essentially, we're not on by default in beta, and then I don't think we'd want to lock it on if it's the first time it's going on by default.
Okay, I can. Well, Jordan, I saw your mouth open.
Is there a hand up? I don't know.
Okay. So I can see that as a reason to allow a GA without it being locked. It doesn't bother me to do that. I think the threshold for beta should remain.
Okay, so then the revision would be that in the nothing should be locked to on by default if it's never had a off by default of at least one cycle, if not more potentially. So for things that are going to uh, GA but have never been on by default because their APIs have been off, we would have to allow it to be turned off even though it's GA. I mean, in some
Lock,
sense, you can
lock
because
or
you can turn
not,
the AP off, right?
log on to quality level. Like the first time it's on, it shouldn't be locked because it's the first time
Exactly.
it's been on. So like being able to toggle it off as a mitigation for the things that we can't turn on during beta because they're new endpoints or whatever. Like, yeah, the first time it's on by default, it still has to be unlocked as a mitigation.
Exactly.
That's like its own ball of wax. Separately,
That needs to be documented because I think this isn't right now. Is this documenting?
It is. I'm willing to make that update. That's
Okay.
reasonable.
Separately, for most things, when they hit beta, they go on by default. And beta as a bar for like it's good as far as we know.
Right.
Like there shouldn't be remaining known gaps and us say, yep, it's beta now. So
right.
If it's a beta API, even if it's not on by default, like at that point, we're committed to making it forward convertible to the GA. So even for APIs that aren't on by default, I think it's still useful to say, like, you need to have your testing in place. You shouldn't have known gaps where you're like, we're not really sure if this is going to work, but we'll kick it out there in beta and we'll find out.
Right.
So the bar for beta being, you think you're done as far as you know. And the things you're
This
planning.
doesn't preclude learning in beta and making API changes, like which we rarely do, but we do sometimes. It just means that we're committed, which we already are anyway for beta, to forward compatibility on those and backward compatibility on those. So I don't see any new. I don't see any new actual. This doesn't. I mean, it formalizes it, I think, is the way to put it. But it's and so hopefully will prevent things from slipping through that might have slipped through before. But I don't think you see any actual new requirements.
Yeah, where I see most the types of things I see most people putting at the GA criteria today are things like scale testing and
Guilty.
And those are the types of things that sometimes do inform API changes. Like, oh, we realized like where we put this, we actually can't put it all in one object, or we can't split it across objects or something. And so those are the types of things we actually want to flush out, at least to some degree, like the planned scale testing stuff. Like we should be doing that before we're like, and here's the beta, which we know we can convert up to the GA. It's like, what if the shape isn't the same?
But if it's too broken.
Yeah. So yeah, we will. I fully expect we will learn things during beta, and sometimes those will require changes, and it might require like a second beta, like a tweak, or that's fine. But we shouldn't call it beta and commit to forward compatibility when we still know there are things that we need to do that we haven't even done.
Right. Tim?
Hey, so I mean, obviously, I support this. Maybe not obviously. I support the idea because I've espoused similar things in the past. I see this mostly as a sort of intensification of our previous positions and clarification of a bunch of things. I wanted to ask though, like, we've had a few cases of this recently where we're adding a new API and a feature that has to go with it, and the coordination between gates and API enablement is super like oblique. Like, are we still okay with this? Is this still the right thing, or should we be bringing one concept of beta-ness to the whole system?
This is the why are beta APIs off by default? Do we still think that it was a good thing for beta APIs, beta serializations?
Or turn that around, like if we think it's a bad thing to enable beta APIs, why are we okay enabling beta fields in GA APIs? That seems inconsistent. And the fact that we have two different mechanisms which both say beta, which sometimes are needed in concert and sometimes are not, is super confusing to people who want to turn it on, but more importantly to developers who want to do interesting work. They got to jump through kind of ridiculous hoops. Like, can we do better?
To the question of why fields that are beta are allowed and full beta serializations are not, from my view, that distinction exists because if you write a beta manifest and we eventually remove the beta endpoint, because maybe it has different validation requirements or different defaulting, you have to touch all the manifests that you have. So everyone using that manifest has to change. If you have a beta field, you don't have to modify every manifest. So I see a difference in impact outside of the project based on that criteria, field versus entirely new endpoint. I don't know if Jordan has a different or another reason. That's the one that I see.
That's the main reason. I think like when you add a single field, that's a much smaller change generally than an entire API type. Just practically, a beta field in a stable type is smaller. It usually gets better review than, or more focused review. And so the risk of realizing something was fundamentally wrong is smaller. But the main one is what David said, like the happy path of, yep, it worked, we progressed it, now it's GA. When you're talking about an endpoint, clients have to change and field consumers don't.
I acknowledge that distinction. It still feels incongruent.
I don't love we call, like, they all funnel through a thing called beta, and I agree, it's confusing.
One of the biggest problems I've had with the way we do beta forever is we don't make it hard enough to accidentally use a beta. And like, because we're being recorded, so I guess I'm on the record. I think it should be harder for people to use our system when they're using a beta feature. They should have to acknowledge over and over again that they're willing to use a beta feature, or they should get a big warning that says, yo, that's beta, you can't do that. And I'm not exactly sure what the shape of that would be, but I have ideas. I know it's super complicated to try to enact that. But if we're going to be pushing, into a stronger definition of what beta means, I'd like to suggest we reconsider looking at that.
David?
Then I guess I'm maybe not quite sure what you were suggesting. So initially I thought you were saying that you wanted it to be harder to make use of betas because betas were less reliable. One of the things that I was going to say is by making betas more reliable, I, at least from my point of view, I'm trying to make it so that something that is on by default in production is something we think is production ready. And so I might actually be open to going in the other direction, but I don't know that I would take both steps at the same time.
What I'm really envisioning is something more like, and maybe we could solve both problems, but more like kubectl -- yes, I know this is beta, apply -f file. And then it would allow you to use a beta field. But if you didn't say the yes, I know it's beta, you would get back an error that says, yo, this manifest uses a beta field. You have to explicitly enable this. And then people would not accidentally step on it. And they wouldn't have to change their manifests, but they would have to acknowledge through their pipelines or however they're deploying things that they are or are not enabling betas. And perhaps through the wonders of API machinery and focused effort of brilliant people, we could make API groups feel similarly. So the API group wouldn't have the you need to go edit your manifest problem. It would still be API group v1 foobar, but you would have to say -- yes, I know this is beta. I don't know. Again, I'm sort of thinking out loud here, but like having two paths that do the same thing that are spelled differently, that have different results, just doesn't feel good. And
it's super hard to explain to people, honestly. Like in GKE, because it's so hard, when you enable beta APIs, we automatically flip the feature gate that's associated with them because we don't want people to have to do both, right? Like, and what happens, we have states, I think, that aren't well tested. Like, it's not really well tested what happens when the feature gate's on and the APIs off in all cases for new API, like, and vice versa, right? So we've created a situation where you can configure states that probably aren't nearly as well tested as the expected both off, both on. So I certainly think that's reasonable. What we've done in PRR for like client side things is like we have that positive acknowledgement. Like we make them set an environment variable that basically says, yeah, I know I'm using this alpha feature. Otherwise, kube control will like puke on the command line. And it's that kind of I like that idea, like a header or something that requires that you have to say use to get the new behavior or something. But it's not easy, especially at this stage of the project, to make those kind of changes. David?
Yeah, looking at the agenda, I see there's several other.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're right. Yeah, thank you.
And one other thing, I guess, before I leave this topic, I think the question that I would have for Tim is whether he sees the need to resolve those two different experiences as a prereq for moving forward with formalizing stronger requirements for beta.
I'll say no, because I know exactly what that would mean for your proposal, and I think your proposal is directional movement in the right direction, so that's fine. I won't even say fear. My conviction is we will talk about it. We'll have lots of us nodding, saying, yeah, something like this sounds like a good idea, and then we'll never do anything with it because it's hard, because it would require deeper changes, and because there's relatively few people. David, I'm looking back at you now. Very few people who could understand the machinery well enough to shepherd a change like that.
I agree. I will say that I don't know if I specifically hope for this outcome, but I think I can envision an outcome where the beta here is reliable enough that we start reconsidering the choice of, is that serialization really one that we can't trust? And what would I be willing to do? I'll say that revisit in a release and see how maybe a release and a half, see whether we think that has happened before embarking, because there's possibility of solving the problem in the other direction, Tim.
All right.
Okay,
So
I'm happy to discuss it with you. I'm not going to get in the way of this proposal, though I have not read your KEP yet.
All right. Yeah, let's move on. Thank you for keeping track of time there, David. And I think that there is another issue I still owe putting around API evolution that's related to this. So, all right. Next, we have Joel.
Yeah, hi. Is it possible for me to share my screen?
Sure. Let me find you in the list here.
So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Joel. I work for Red Hat. I'm one of the OpenShift API reviewers. And as I'm sure all the other API reviewers here know, API review is hard. And one of my goals is to try and make it easier. So for the last 6 months or so, I've been working on a linter implementation let me see if this is going to allow me to share. Basically try and enforce. Okay, I think that worked. Basically to try and enforce the API conventions. So this project basically started out as going through the API conventions and trying to work out what was mechanical that we could start enforcing. So things like a field has to be either optional or required, not both, and it should have a marker for that. There's also things beyond that where we've kind of picked up learnings. So for example, I believe modern API review in Cube, the comment always starts with the JSON tag name. So we've built a rule for that. Now I've talked to various people about this. I was talking to Tim earlier in the week about it. I think we're at a point now where this could be useful for KK API reviews. And so I'd like to propose that we start using this going forward. Now, there are a number of rules that have been implemented already. So this is just the README main page, and we've kind of got documentation on there. There's one that enforces the way that conditions should be. There's things for the comment starts, the JSON tags, all sorts of different rules that are picked up from the API conventions that can be turned on or off. Now, this project, I wanted it to be able to work with CRDs and built-ins. The default configuration works more for built-ins, and for CRDs, there's kind of like configuration you can add. Taking a look at that, for example, sorry, This is actually Cluster API. The Cluster API project have adopted this project, and they've started using a whole bunch of these different rules to try and improve their API, and as they move through their different iterations. So there's a whole long wish list. Where do I have that? A whole long wish list of different rules that are hoping to be implemented over time. I think there's like nearly 30 of them. A lot of them work now for CRDs because we have a lot better declarative validation. But I know that in the future we have that coming from API machinery. So a lot of these in the future would also be useful for built-in types. So yeah, I kind of wanted to go through and kind of show people this, also see what questions people might have, what they might want to see about the project, what they might want to know about the project before we start moving towards trying to get this helping on KK. Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
I just want to get my hand in the queue first before anybody else. So you go ahead and tell me when you're ready for questions.
No, shoot.
So we did talk about earlier this week. I am wildly enthusiastic about anything that makes API review easier. So, thank you for falling on this grenade. We have sort of a loose concept of lint in the declarative validation work, which is still of suspicious durability. It may still yet be ripped out. I don't think so, but we are making sure that it is possible. And literally, I had started on a branch which was doing more robust linting, and I realized, oh, good grief, I'm going to end up writing a whole framework for this, and these things already exist, so why would I do this myself? Which we talked about. This is more for the record. You're building on Golang CI lint, right?
Yeah, so it actually leverages the plugin system that they have.
Yeah, so I was going to ask, can you show a linter and walk us through, like, what does it look like to implement a relatively trivial one? And then I will say, again, for the recording, one of the things I would hope to come out of this would be a layer even above that makes it even trivialer, more trivial, sorry, for us to write the sorts of validations that we're going to write. As we look through the declarative validation stuff, we're moving more and more stuff into these comment tags, which means a lot of the validations we're going to write are given this comment tag, this other tag must exist or must not exist or must have this value or must not have that value. Those things like really ought to be 4 lines of code each, sort of end state.
Yeah, so yeah, as you mentioned, this is like a Golang CI lint plugin. And with that, they basically take the Go analysis analyzer structs and just implement them. So you could run this on its own if you wanted to. It's kind of using a standard framework. So this is the comment start one that I mentioned. So we have that rule. We want to make sure that all of the Go doc starts with the JSON tag. So there is some boilerplate. This is all boilerplate that tells it, what function we're actually going to run, what dependencies we have. And then this is actually the run function. So this inspect fields is actually a helper that we've built. This is like a helpers package here, which iterates through all of the AST nodes and picks out the ones that we need to care about. So for example, if you've got a JSON tag that is like, ignore this, that's not going to be marshaled. That's not part of the actual schema. So we ignore that. We don't bother checking that. That's all handled centrally in this kind of inspector. And then we basically just pass this like check field function. So for the comment start one, we check for the field name. If it doesn't have a Go doc, we point out that it's missing a Go doc. And if it does have a Go doc, if it doesn't have the right prefix, but it does have the right word, just case insensitive matched, then we send a report that says, hey, you've got the right word here, but the case is wrong. Here's a auto fix. And then if we don't have that case insensitive match, it just says, hey, this should start with the JSON tag name. So in terms of like, how do you write these? That is kind of the main bulk of it. But another thing with this is obviously the testing. And the Go analysis has this really great framework for this, where you can just write your Go struct basically. So the way to say that I want this error to come out is just this like / want. This comment one, field no comment is missing its Go doc, right? Field no comment is missing its Go doc. There's one down here, incorrect statement, incorrect start. Go for incorrect start should start with incorrect start. So then, yeah, that is, in the cases where I've been building these, I spend most of my time writing the different test cases. And I don't know, I have looked at the declarative validation implementation, and that's very neat and very small. I didn't get to look at the test cases yet, so I'm not sure how you're handling that.
We don't. The linting structure we have in the declarative validation is built entirely at the moment around here's the comment block for a type or a field, analyze it. That's it. That's the extent of it. And the testing on it is minimal or maybe even none. And we have exactly 2 lint rules defined, right? It was more of a placeholder for us to start accumulating, hey, you should probably never have required and optional on the same type. That seems like a thing we could prevent as we're walking the type tree. But having a different framework is fine. Like, we're not that invested in it. So I'm very happy to have this. Sorry, I'm reading and talking at the same time.
Sorry.
I was going to say optional and required don't get capitalized. But happy to have a framework that we could plug into to use this. What I would ask, I guess, as we're moving forward, how can we, or should we, separate the responsibility for reviewing new rule implementations versus sort of reviewing the scaffolding of the linter itself versus applying new rules to the KK code base?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Like, in terms of reviewing the scaffolding of the linter, like, there's myself and a couple of others who've kind of been working on a lot of that, and I think we're all fairly comfortable with that. In terms of reviewing the actual, what are the API conventions that we're implementing here? So far, a lot of that has been basically my experience. I've been kind of training under David for 3 years doing API reviews, so I have a good kind of grasp of it, but maybe not as good as some of the upstream reviewers. So
I think
reckon,
after 3 years, you've probably got good context.
I reckon like what I've done so far is fairly accurate, and I've got a good read and understanding of the upstream conventions. In terms of enabling that in the future, I would love to see some input from the API reviewers if they feel like there's stuff there that's wrong. And in terms of how do we implement the existing rules of like, yeah, these are done already, how do we enable these? I think each of these different rules that we've implemented can be done one by one. It's designed so you can choose which of these you want. So I'm imagining like a PR goes up, and as a group we discuss, does this linter do something that we care about, that we want in the right way? And if it does, we approve it. If it doesn't, then there's probably a bug in the linter and we go fix it.
David, have
David.
you before me?
Yeah, so I think that phase-in makes sense to me. I'll say this project, there's a KEP that describes its goals and what it was trying to do, which I reviewed again this week. I had very minor comments. I'm happy to merge it otherwise. I think it would be useful to actually see a PR that integrates this and enables one of the linters in Cube. The one that I am personally most interested in is the one related to optionality, pointer, and omit empty, making sure that we don't have an accident. So like as a starting rule, that would be personally useful for me.
Yeah. So
beyond that, I don't know that I would feel a need to go deep into how the actual structure is built, but I can see the draw from wanting to do similar linting for declarative validation.
Yeah, David, I guarantee you will end up writing lint rules. You're gonna review something, you're gonna go, oh, this again, I'm writing a rule, damn it. And so I want to make sure that we all have a great experience in doing that.
I agree with that, although I don't know, I might take the option of this again, Joel, I need this rule, please.
See, and this is I think you've been talking to my boss. But yeah, anyway, I agree with the incremental rollout. I wanted to say that, and I suspect if you already got a bunch implemented, there's a bunch of trivial ones that you're going to turn on, and we'll probably go nuts flagging things in KK, and they're all like correct flags, and we should fix them. But doing that one by one is the right way to do it. The same as we do for regular Golang CI linters, right? We turn it on, look at the results of what did it flag. Do we agree with all of these? And if so, let's turn it on. If we end up with a ton of no lints, then it's wrong. Something's wrong.
So this PR actually is a KK PR where I attempted to enable this linter in verify, and it does work. It came up with like 1100 results from the 2 rules that I enabled. So one is optional XOR required. Thank you, Tim, for pointing out the XOR is important. And then the other one is like required fields should not have an empty, should not be pointers. I had imagined that to make this useful in the first instance, we could turn this on for only new changes, like the new from revision that Golang CI lint has. But I'm not against fixing some of the old stuff that can be fixed. When it comes to serialization, I'm a little bit hesitant to say, yeah, we should go change all of these things to add them at empty where they're missing them. So I think we may want to have some rules in place. Looking at the cluster API one, they have used the standard Golang CI lint like exceptions to be able to do this and exclude their existing things that can't be fixed.
So a couple things on that. We wound up not using the diff tooling. We had that and we had a separate job that did it. We found it confused people a lot, and it has a risk when you need to like backport a fix or something, and suddenly that tooling is going, oh, you're touching this file, we're going to run all the lint rules, and you're like, I'm just trying to merge a bug fix, don't block me on past bugs. So I think that phasing them in one by one makes sense. I think one thing that we should probably do is make sure that those changes get routed to API approvers. We can configure the owners to flag like kind API change on when you're adding another one of these lints turned on. And also I'll follow up on your PR. We should talk. There's Golang CI lint v2 just released, and we have some pretty big diff in flight right now to the like original Golang CI lint tooling in KK to adopt that. We'll probably want to make sure that we don't have to do that twice.
Yeah, no, that'd be great. So yeah, please do look at the PR. I've kind of modified the existing Golang CI lint script basically to allow me to pass in a custom binary. The way that it actually builds is you install Golang CI lint, you call Golang CI lint custom, and then it downloads all of the dependencies and rebuilds you a custom binary that is itself plus your plugin. So yeah, that's
You
kind of what I
should
achieved here.
we actually have a Golang CI lint plugin already in the main one for log checking. There have been some problems with that. We can tag in Patrick and discuss that offline.
Okay, yeah, that'd be useful. Okay, yeah, I was just kind of bringing this up to sort of say this is a thing, I'm trying to get it, and if people think this is useful and can help me get this goal through, I would appreciate the help.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, looks great. Okay, if there's nothing more on this, then Kirsten's up.
Hello. Could I share my? Oh wait, Ben, your hand is up.
I think that's stay
That
up.
was left.
Oh, that's
over.
old.
Yeah.
Okay.
Let me give this to Kirsten.
Could I share my screen or?
Yes. Now you can.
Okay. I do have problems with sharing my screen, so everyone pray for me. Oh, I can't share my screen. I have a new laptop that I locked down my browser and now I can't share my screen. So if you could share the doc for me.
Sure.
I'm
Yeah.
so secure. I've locked myself out of sharing my screen.
1 second.
Thank you.
This one?
Sorry, everyone. Yeah, that's
No
perfect.
problem. Oh, this is that. We stopped you. I just took all these Bitly things off of here because now they're advertising. Okay.
Oh, really? Yeah, I thought it was weird, and then I was like, well, I haven't used Bitly for a while. Maybe that should be. I thought it was just showing it to me because I was the owner of the link. Anyway, hi everyone. I'm Kirsten from the Enhancement Sub Project in SIG Architecture, and I I went over this with John, also from the enhancement sub project, and he thought that I could bring it to this meeting and just get a little bit of feedback before maybe this is rolled out in this release. And this is about KEP versioning. As people may or may not know, or everyone knows, there's no actual KEP version right now, and the undertaking of adding, mandatory versioning it's a lot. So the enhancement subproject in the meetings, we thought about how could we best like break this down to be as like to minimize disruptions and then sort of maximize our ability to eventually roll out some like versioning in the KEP template. So phase one for this is I like to think of it as like getting our own house in order. I think like over the years, we've been pretty willy-nilly with our changes to the KEP template, and we've also run into some issues with, template changes, going in at the wrong times, template changes, overwriting other changes, etc. So this phase one is the idea that we get our own house in order and set ourselves up for success before we roll out any sort of automation and mandatory changes for KEP authors. So phase one basically thinks about I'll just go through the sections. It's pretty fast, so everyone can put up with me for a couple minutes. The first section is KEP template change collection and timing. We've actually run into this in the past where changes to the KEP template have been kind of a free-for-all, where some of the changes go in during the enhancements time, some of them go in at the very end, some of them just go in whenever. And part of this is, the idea that let's organize our changes, like let's organize our change collection and just be more, have a little bit more moderation on it. I actually did it this release where every time there was a change to the KEP template, I added a label, added a milestone, made sure it wasn't merging during the wrong time. And I think that that's, part of the process is, if we're gonna have versioning, we also have to have discipline in how we mechanically make changes to the template. So you can make your PRs at any time, but we're going to have more of a defined merge period when those changes will be merging. Hi, John. Yes.
I just wanted to say, just reading the comments on the doc, like, can you give an estimate of like order of magnitude, how many KEP template changes there are, say, per release? I think it's pretty small. Right?
Well, yeah, it's pretty small per release. So this idea that there's like a million of them that create this giant queue isn't. I think the last change was the last change was this month, but before this change, it was maybe 6 months ago. So we don't have like a high volume of changes. At the same time, just to address some of the comments of like, this might block changes. This might cause issues. Number one, I didn't really experience that this release. But number two, I think that could potentially be a feature rather than a bug. Like if we think about, the changes that, let's say, David was proposing, that's like a substantial amount of changes to the KEP template. Somebody else might propose other changes for the same release. And, you don't necessarily want it to be the person who gets there first is the person who gets their changes into the template. We might decide, hey, these are too many changes going into the release. Like authors only have a certain amount of capacity for change, or maybe these changes are incompatible. Maybe one is a higher priority than another. So I think that this idea of, having a method of collection and a method of timing and a method of merging, I think gives us more control over the template itself. And honestly, like I don't think that we should be tweaking the template constantly. I think that we should have a mindful set of changes that make sense for both us and the authors that we can easily articulate in each release. Ben?
We do make small changes that aren't like substantial but are worthwhile, minor typos or like
Yeah.
clarifications.
Mhm.
But my concern wasn't that that this happens. My concern is that if we do sort of like a code freeze for template and then we have a backlog that's going to merge later, what
Mhm.
winds up happening when we do that is that any conflicts that exist are discovered when we lift the freeze, which is painful.
Well,
As opposed to like, when the PRs are going in or something. I don't know if that's necessarily like a real blocker for like having versions though. I mean, if we just say we're going to batch up telling people to switch to the new one each release, you could imagine a couple of different ways we could do that. For example, we could fork the template to have current template and like next template, and then once a release, we fold all the changes in or something. Like, I think there's other ways to approach this that don't rely on having a backlog of to be merged PRs. Those tend to be painful.
Well, good point. But firstly, we don't actually have that many PRs. Like in my experience for this release, since I actually did, tag them and hold them, I actually just checked the changes. And when I was checking the changes, there weren't any conflicts. I was definitely mindful of that. There were minor changes, but I mean, I guess that you could do the whole like have a totally different directory for the kept template, but I don't know. Like I was actually trying to come up with like what is like the easiest path to adding a version in the kept.yaml and making it as unconfusing as possible to authors while also um, organizing ourselves. So like
Well,
I didn't actually encounter any of the problems that you're suggesting that we could have. It's possible that it could happen, but I think that at the same time, organizing your sets of changes is important and not necessarily just allowing a constant stream of changes to go into something that is taken as a whole.
Well, so that would be a good reason to do forking it into like a next version and a current version. So at any given
Mm-hmm.
time, we tell people you should copy the current template to write your PR, and then
Mm-hmm.
unambiguously the new version will be available. That would also sidestep the need to push Git tags to the repo, which I think has some other friction. Something to think about. I think that you can have all of this without having like late breaking discovery of conflicts. And I think past experience with that sort of thing in other repos is that it's sort of inevitable.
All right, we have some more
David?
questions, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, so I might not be the best KEP author, I guess, but one of the things that I commonly have happen to me is I will start a KEP in one release and not target merging it until another release. And if we are going to eventually require that a particular template be used, one of the questions I would have is how hard or easy is it for me to diff that in?
Okay, so this is actually a good question, and this is why getting to the other section is why I was proposing creating tags for the template versions in the repo. I think that it's really hard for authors to know what exactly the changes are, and like you can say, "Hey, look at the PRR section," but that doesn't really tell you like what the actual diff is. And by tagging, we would be able to like authors can see the diff between any two versions. And that's also something that I was like part of this is also communication, so that at the start of the release we're going to like actually tell people, hey, these are the changes, hey, here's the diff, you can look at this and know precisely what fields you're missing. Maybe some of them are just guidance, so you can read the guidance. You don't necessarily have to update your template, but these are also maybe required things. And having that like easy to view, easy to discover sort of change log outside of just like Git history was something that I thought was really important for the phase one sort of rollout. Tim or
So
David?
I was just gonna say, I
go ahead.
can see that a diff helps. It sounds like it would still be manual to do, and that would be okay with me. But
Okay. Yeah, the diff is like, I don't know. I just thought that the diff was really important because that's the best way to be able to tell people what changed and not just rely on vibes. Tim?
So I have two questions, but I'm going to do the second one first because you said the word. This feels like the sort of thing that an LLM would be exceptionally good at doing for people. On the one hand, we have KEPs, which sort of started as design docs, right? And design docs are more text than structure. And then we added PRR, which is honestly more structure than text.
Mhm.
And we split out kep.yaml so that we put the sort of structured things in a different place, but we left PRR in the text.
Mhm.
Asking users, especially contributors who aren't on this call, to go and run the diff between two tags and then figure out what that means for your kep on every release, especially if you have a long running kep that's going to span 3, 4, 5 releases, and go and backport all those changes into your kep feels pretty onerous to me. Like
Sure, sure.
I don't
Well,
want to do that. How can we make it easier for people?
right,
Like there's
right.
structured things where if we put, for example, PRR in YAML, right? I know everybody loves our YAML. We put it in YAML and you have to answer all the questions. And we have a bot that says, sorry, you didn't answer all the questions, ergo your PR doesn't get merged.
Mhm.
You can only do that if you have structure and schema, right?
Right.
And I don't think the main body of the kep has enough schema to do that properly.
Correct. Correct.
So I guess I'm asking a lot of questions. How can we make it easier?
Okay, so totally agree, but like we can't use an LLM or any other tool to tell you that you're not at the correct version if we don't actually like do the phase 1 of getting a version in the cap. So like totally acknowledge that, and I think that that is like the next horizon of like how can you best like tell people what they need to change so they don't have to just do it with their eyeballs. But this phase 1 is really, hey, you have to do it with your eyeballs right now, but in order to get that tooling in the future, we actually have to put a version in the YAML today, right? Because like anybody's experiment, anybody's anything needs like this definition today where we say this is the version. So totally acknowledge. And that's like phase 2 or phase 3 or some other phase, but all of those improvements require like a version in the template today to say like this is our
Sure.
goal and this is what we're using, this is our benchmark. Are
That's
you
a good point.
there?
That's a very fair point. It feels like the sort of thing we should not be asking people to do. We should be asking machines to do.
Right.
But I predicate that on the need to split. I'll give it 1 second. Need to split the sort of design doc part of it and the PRR part of it. And maybe we need to break it into a separate file or something that has different structure. Like every time I open the kep template, it takes all my energy not to rewrite the whole thing because honestly, it's terrible. It has evolved into a really duplicative and very, very verbose thing that I think we could cut half of it out. Not like draw the line at the PRR. I'm ignoring everything below that. Everything above the PRR line, I bet we could make half as long.
Right,
for
but
every
Tim,
kep.
like the whole this is the whole thing though, is like we can't get there in those conversations until we just literally put a version on where we are. Like we can't make a better version of something. We can't like, say, hey, let's change the template. Let's do all this stuff if we don't have just like the basic mechanism of like, hey, this is the version and this is how we make a version. And that's all that this is. Like
we can, it's just not very nice. I have a PR open somewhere where I have started, not a PR, but a branch that I started rewriting the kep template and then went, oh my God, am I really going to ask all of the 100 open keps to rewrite themselves in this new format? Ugh. And then I put it aside and haven't revisited. So I agree with the idea. I think tagging it is fine. I think
it's not
just
the
like,
end game. It's just like
it's a toe in the water.
it's like we're getting in the game and we're trying to give other people and other, bits of automation that can come later an actual version in the template to use. We're not trying to be like disruptive to authors. We're not trying to really create any requirements here. This is just like, let's get the structure of change going because we've been talking about it for a long time. And let's just like start while, starting in a mindful way. John?
Yeah, so I wanted to say, I think that I'm skeptical that LLMs will do it because when we make a change to the kep template, it's usually to add something additional information that the kep author has to add. And I don't see how it's not just reformatting, right? It's like, well, there's one that just came up like, can you add into the kep template a section that says whether RBAC, what the RBAC considerations are for the default roles, right? Like, should this be part of the default roles or not, and why, and whatever. Like, an LLM can't fill that information in because it doesn't know. So I think that I'm skeptical that an LLM is going to help that much from the point of view of, like, it's not just reformatting, it's adding new content that only the authors would know, I suspect. We only have 7 minutes left, and there is another agenda item. I don't know how much time Renal needs, but maybe we go to Ben, and then Kirsten, if you could wrap up quickly and at least give him 5 minutes or so.
Sure, sorry.
So I think there's more structure than we think. Like, these are generally we're adding a new heading in Markdown that you need to do. I don't actually think it's an intractable problem or related to LLMs. I think we can diff if we want to tell KEPs that they need to switch. I don't think that's an intractable problem, especially once we have versioning, but I don't think we should solve that now. Like, this is very intentionally scoped down to figuring out how we communicate that we have a set of changes. I think we should follow up some more offline about the exact mechanics, but the idea of providing, here's a diff view, we have made some changes maybe since last time you looked, is worthwhile.
Okay, so I'll talk it out online, but yeah, that's phase one. It's not as big as the other phases, but it's necessary. So that's what I got.
And I think, unless I haven't heard anybody saying we should not do this for 134, I think we probably should go ahead. At least get started on it. All right, Mrunal?
Hey folks, so this is a follow-up from a topic from a couple of weeks ago. So Derek and I started a conversation on SIG regarding the viability of hosting a community-supported Kubernetes MCP server. So since then, we have come up with this proposal for a new work group which can house such a project. Additionally, it can also look into how we run multi-agent AI applications on top of Kubernetes. We imagine MCP as being the building block, and then you have multiple agents, and think clearly we are missing patterns for what it would take to run such applications on Kubernetes today. So two things. How would today Kubernetes is designed for interaction through API from humans or other deterministic systems, but it needs to evolve to allow access or control through agentic systems. And secondly, Kubernetes started with the goal of web applications expanded to specialized workloads. Now, how can we evolve to run the agentic AI talking to each other at scale? How should those applications be structured? How can they communicate? How should they be secured, and so on? So the hope is to explore these topics within this work group. So we went to SIG API yesterday, and we see comments from Joe and SIG API folks. And basically, we're coming back here and we'll talk to other SIGs to get their feedback. Derek, did you want to add anything more?
Yeah, the one thing I want to add is I know in the original mailing list thread, Dims had pointed back to the CNCF issue where some of these topics were being explored. I do feel like I recognize it's almost a chicken and egg scenario. And so we did try to rally on that issue for others to kind of give their perspectives on this proposal here. For the CNCF topic, it seemed like they were advocating for an MCP server per category. And so the question I see communities having to wrestle with is like, who and how involved are they in building that? So the original discussion actually 2 weeks ago, or in the mailing list thread, was like the idea that the Kubernetes community would have a interest and or motivation to have a say in potentially how AI systems communicate with them. And that was the topic I think we were looking also for SIG Arch to weigh in, like, is an MCP server in scope for the project technically? Then obviously in the spirit of like further evaluating that concept is like the hows and the mechanics and what other things come up, or even evaluating that core question itself in a working group, if the SIG at this time was not able to answer that, is kind of the spirit of what we're trying to pose here. But I do believe there's a very clear chicken and egg scenario that even this working group could help inform the CNCF on maybe how other projects should approach this. In that spirit, for folks who want to review this and give their feedback and comments, it'd be very much appreciated. And there is a sign up form for people who might be interested in exploring this space, just to even understand if there's a collection of people in this community who would be interested in like doing the work if the place was created for it. So if you're interested, that would be awesome to hear. From a conceptual problem, I think in the API machinery discussion, we had a good dialogue on, like, I think Jago raised the fact that like MCP as a concept blurs the line between servers and clients. And I do think it kind of draws attention even in our traditional charters. Like the irony in my head a little bit is that the quote unquote intelligent machines of the future are not calling the APIs we produce. They're asking for a different API. And then conceptually as well, like the CLIs that we've driven may or may not be the right ones in that same line. And so all I'd ask is, as people review this, kind of have a what if or an open-minded perspective to see like how could we show up to help support the ecosystem, like navigate this tension point. I do think it's very real and material and not something that regularly we're faced to challenge in the last 10 years. So yeah, if any updates on the proposal refinement that could help draw consensus, I think Mernal and I would really appreciate. But hopefully we can try to get some path forward or resolution relatively quick. I think it's clear to us there's a lot of community momentum and interest in trying to find a room to work out these issues. And I guess the core question I see here is like, as a project, do we want to participate in that discussion or not? And I think, I know personally, I think it makes sense for Kubernetes, the brand, to have a participation in that. And so I guess John and Tim's and others, I'd like to have weigh in, but then the mechanics on how we realize that, I think the working group is what we're trying to help unwrestle.
So I need to read all of this, but I mean, certainly I don't have any initial, like, to me, evolving Kubernetes to meet all these new use cases is super critical to our relevance. And I think that we have at first blush, I think, yes, we have a role to play here. And maybe that gets exactly what that role is, does come out of the working group. But I'll read up on these things. And I was out during the last call, so I'm not up to speed on it.
Yeah.
But
the only other comment is like the last feedback in the meeting, which unfortunately weren't able to record, John, was like there was a call to give a sample server. I just want to make it clearly understood that we're not trying to mint this server as a default or reference. It's really just one among many that has appeared. And it's a useful way of linking to a video of what is possible. But I know there's many others. But the design aesthetic or approaches that's taken to it, I do think it is an area where folks like ourselves could have an opinion. And then as it also came up in the API machinery discussion yesterday, I do think there's a question to explore. Are there things we could do for the ecosystem around how we declare or define APIs that could say, this is how you should or shouldn't respond to an AI system that could benefit a lot of others. So with that, I'll respect everyone's time and just thanks for the last 7 minutes here. And thanks, John, for the follow-up.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you, everybody. And we'll see you all in a couple of weeks.